Thank you very much. And one more time, welcome to the marketplace. Now, the Ghana Interbank Payment and Settlement Systems GHIPSS is set to allow universal banks in the country directly take part in its mandate. GHIPSS hopes to do so by offloading part of its shares to financial institutions as part of initiative taken to encourage banks to take advantage of its products and services without hesitation. GHIPSS also believes the move would boost its operations to the benefit of the financial sector and the economy at large. Chief Executive of the organization, GHIPSS, explained this to journalists at a briefing to mark GHIPSS' 10 years of operations under the theme 10 years of promoting electronic payments in Ghana.
The Ghana Interbank Payment and Settlement System, GHIPSS, was established to operate under the Bank of Ghana in 2008 to promote electronic cash transactions in the country. Among its mandates was a reduction of cash flow between individuals and commercial banks, which eventually led to the creation of the eSwitch card, which allows financial transaction electronically. After operating for a decade, management of GHIPSS has hinted that discussions have begun with financial institutions in the country to operate the system. Addressing journalists on activities at its 10 years anniversary, Chief Executive of GHIPSS, GHIPSS, disclosed that almost all commercial banks in the country have expressed interest to take over its operations.
It's wholly owned by the central bank alone. All the banks, although they know its usefulness, they see it as a central bank initiative. So when it comes to usage, it's not patronized or they don't feel part of it. When it's owned by the banks, they see it as one of their own and they are more encouraged. It was as a result of that we had a strategy section that we said, right, why don't we work with the banks and allocate some of the shares to the banks so that they own part of GHIPSS and becomes part of the entity. So that's ownership of the entity, but the function is different. When in the deliberations last year, we were thinking whether we should we leave it open for the banks to decide, or or should we divide it amongst all the banks? And the thinking was, let's leave it and let the banks decide. Those who are interested should actually express their interest. To our surprise, all the banks were interested. So I think that it's good news in that regard.
All the 33 banks.
Is it 35 or 37? It's 35.
He therefore urged the opportunity to highlight some successes chalked by the company since its establishment in the country.
I remember what the Ghana payment systems was like 10 years ago. I remember when you sign checks within region, it takes about 3 days for the checks to be signed, and inter-regional checks, we're talking about 7, 8, 9 days, etc. Today, we can boast of same day and next day nationwide when it comes to check clearing. I wouldn't also want to forget our first baby, eSwitch. That was the vehicle that was created to mitigate against certain issues that we have in Ghana.
The company also outlined some programs planned for the anniversary celebrations under the theme 10 years of promoting electronic payments in Ghana.
Let's still stay within the banking sector for now, where the number of banks operating in the country has now reached 35. This was after Construction Bank was given the full universal banking last Friday, while Beige Capital has also been given final license, but on condition that it meets some 2 key requirements. George Wiafe tells us more.
The Construction Bank will primarily focus on financing constructions in the country. The bank has already opened an office at the Octagon Office Complex around Tudu here in Accra. Beige Capital is expected to focus on SME financing. Some analysts have criticized the Bank of Ghana over this approach, especially when it is working to reduce the number of banks in operation with the proposed increase in minimum capital requirement. But head of banking supervision at the Bank of Ghana, Raymond Amanfo, says this process was started long time ago.
When you give a previous year approval, that meets the condition. Then you are already, by your provisional approval, set them to do certain activities. So when they meet your conditions and you can confirm their capital sources and that, then you can go ahead and then give them approval.
He, however, maintains it might be difficult to totally stop issuing licenses to commercial banks.
If you are going to put embargoes, then the embargo must cut across no matter which bank is coming. And assuming you have an international bank like Citibank want to set up, will you say you have an embargo? So we have to be very selective.
The number could also increase to 35 as Ghana Home Loans is almost through in meeting all the requirements to secure its final license. But for some, a lot more banks could increase competition in the sector, a development that could lead to reduction in the cost of credit. However, some are also worried that this trend hasn't helped that much in improving upon the culture of savings in the country.
Away from banking now, and the head of the Millennium Development Authority, MIDA, Engineer Ura Safo, says government will be deciding on a major concessionaire by December this year. He was speaking in an interview at MIDA and ECG's first bidders conference in Accra.
NewCo or the concessionaire will need to meet. This include the level of loss reduction, it includes their performance and how they perform, and there would be sanctions associated with them. If they do not perform according to what they have obligated to perform, there will be sanctions, and so that is what is going to be happening. Now, the agreement is going to be for 20 years. There will be every year their performance will be reviewed, but at the end of every 5 years, there will be a sit-down review where their performance will be reviewed and the appropriate actions will be undertaken at that time.
So what's the level of local participation amongst the 6 companies that you've shortlisted?
Yes, what the requirement, as was announced by His Excellency the President, is that local participation should be at 51%. 51% meaning that when you look at the consortium, in terms of ownership, there should be majority ownership by Ghanaian companies. That is what is going to be now. Now, what it means is that even as the presentation went, if they have to undertake investments of $500 million in the first 5 years, and you own 51% of the organization, it means that you will also have to put up over $250 million. That's what. So a number of Ghanaian entities have bashed up, and they are making. and they are in talk with the bidders to ensure that this requirement is met. We are going to proceed along that line.
So moving forward now.
Meanwhile, the Energy Minister, Boakye Jako, is confident the new concessionaire for the ECG will help end the power crisis in Ghana.
Ghana Industries, the Private Enterprise Federation, and other business associations have met with government or publicly complained about how unreliable power has negatively impacted their businesses. For government, even more critical is the resulting loss of jobs that was precipitated by unreliable power to businesses. Recognizing this fact, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, during the 2017 State of the Nation address, warned that if left unaddressed, the challenges in the energy sector will collapse the Ghanaian economy. As you are aware, Ghana has obtained funding from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a bilateral United States foreign aid agency, for the Ghana Power Compact, which includes the ECG financial and operational turnaround project. The MCC is committing close to $500 million for improvements in the power sector directly and indirectly to catalyze critical private sector participation and investments in the distribution sector. The requirements of the private sector to manage, operate, and above all, carry out strategic infrastructure investments in ECG remains the key objective of the PSP program. I wish to re-emphasize the fact that the government is not privatizing ECG. The government of Ghana will maintain ownership of ECG assets whilst they are leased to the private sector to manage and operate. We require, nay, we insist that the private sector partners make investments in excess of $500 million during the first 5 years of the start of the lease agreements. Indeed, in line with the government's desire to grow the economy through the empowerment of the Ghana private sector, we have requested changes in the private sector participation arrangements to allow for significant Ghanaian private sector participation.
All right, we're now going live to the Alisa Hotel where the bidders conference is going on, and our correspondent Ijolai is standing by with some more updates. Hello, Israel. All right, so we're now linking up with Ijo Lai, who has been taking part in the bidders conference by the ECG and MIDA at the Alisa Hotel to bring us some more updates.
So you're welcome here to the Alisa Hotel where we're having the bidders conference. So the companies that have been shortlisted that are likely to be taking over the operations of the Electricity Company of Ghana are gathered here. And this is the bidders conference. This bidders conference should have taken place sometime last year, but it had to be postponed to this today. Now, there's a little twist, or in fact, there's a new twist to the bidders conference this time around, because what is happening is that new terms and new proposals are being presented to the bidders. Now, at the time that they were shortlisted, or before they were shortlisted, there were some conditions and terms that were presented to them. A few of those have changed. One of them being the fact that now the Ghanaian government wants to have a majority stake in whichever company takes over the PSP. So whichever company takes over, of the 6 that have been shortlisted, government wants a Ghanaian entity to take up 51% of it. Now, that means that a Ghanaian entity has to come up with $250 million as their share of it. The other thing that government also wants is that this time we're looking at, instead of a 25-year concession, we're looking at a 20-year concession. Now, and then the other bit has to do with the fact that this time government says, and the energy minister indicated this a short while ago, government says we don't want any ECG worker, or we don't want any involuntary layoffs for the tenure of the concession. Now, I have with me the Chief Executive of the Millennium Development Authority and Engineer Ura Safo, and he's going to be explaining to us exactly what is happening here right now. Essentially, some terms have changed for the PSP, and so I would want to believe that you've brought the bidders here, and this bidders conference should have happened sometime back last year, right?
Yes, certainly, but let me explain that the terms of the transaction are being modified. However, they were not part of the requirements for shortlisting. These are not terms which were used for shortlisting. For shortlisting, we looked at the net worth of bidders, we looked at their operational experience, their experience in developing countries, and their experience in ability to invest in the distribution sector. These were the 4 areas that were used to qualify them. However, the terms of the transaction have modified based on government's direction. And we are always planning to have a bidders conference. And at this bidders conference, we are discussing the original RFP and any additional terms that have come up.
Right. Now, originally, yes, the terms they didn't probably look at the terms before coming in, but anybody coming in, or the companies that were shortlisted before they came in, they were looking at a 25-year concession. Yes. They were looking at the fact that, well, you were not going to tie them down to saying that you can fire anybody. They were not looking at that. And then they were also looking at carrying this whole thing all by themselves. So those ones have changed.
Yes, certainly there are these new directions, and we are discussing it with them. Based on initial, we have to have more discussions. This afternoon we'll have one-to-one meetings with each of the bidders where we'll go through each of the terms. We'll also find out if they have got any issues, and we'll discuss in detail. But based on initial discussions that we've had since yesterday, things appear positive, but we need to meet some more and see how things go.
All right. Now, we're also looking at these conversations are going to be taking place. But on the side of all that, these conversations that are going to be taking place with the 6 companies that have been shortlisted, where you're indicating that it appears positive.
Well, generally, but we still have to have some more discussions, but it appears positive.
There's a delay in the implementation of the concession. Can you take us, explain to us how far out we are?
Yes, originally we had projected to have this bidders conference in October last year, and now we are sitting in May, so we are talking about more than 7 months. However, the timeline is that we need to have financial close of the private sector participation by early September 2018.
And that has not been affected?
That has not been. That is a deadline that will not move. Now, if we do not meet that deadline, then we will lose the second tranche of the Million Challenge funding in the sum of $190 million. We are working to meet that deadline, and as it is now, that is what we are trying to do.
Right, so between now and the September 2018 date you're looking at, what are we expecting to happen?
Between now and September 2018, we are going to have another bidders conference. Bidders are going to do due diligence of ECG facilities, assess and everything. At the end of the day, they will send in their comments. We will issue a revised RFP based on the addenda that have been issued. And then, hopefully, by October this year, we will receive their proposals. These proposals will be evaluated. They will then will go through a set of approvals, that are required, meaning approval by media board, approval by cabinet, approval by parliament. And then by April 2018, we are required to sign, or government will sign an agreement with the selected concessionaire. Then the concessionaire will start the process of taking over. And then by September 2018, there will be financial close of the transaction so that by October, November, they can take over finally.
Now, some of the things that have come up as far as the workers union of ECG are concerned, has to do with, one, job security, which is something that government is looking at. They've also been arguing that we need to have some Ghanaian, participation in it, local content participation. Now, that has also been happening, being included by virtue of the fact that we have this 51% majority stake. But the other issue that's outstanding, which you've explained before, but I'd like you to clarify, has to do with the Article 7.1 issue. Please explain that to us again.
Well, there is some misunderstanding around Article 7.1. Let me explain that the Article 7.1, which talks about how we deal with conflicts between the compact provisions and domestic law, seeks to address 2 main areas. It seeks to address the issues of procurement, and it seeks to address the issues of tax. To ensure that, because under the compact, we elected that we will go by the Million Challenge Corporation procurement guidelines, and that is what is being used in all the procurement activities that have been done. And under the compact also, there are provisions on tax, and so it's set to deal with that issue. Now, but based on concerns that have been raised, I think there have been discussions with Million Challenge Corporation saying that implementation letters will be issued to explain and delineate what Article 7.1 means, and I believe that will address the issue.
So who will it address the issue for? Will it address the issue for the workers who are raising the concern, or for the bidders?
It will address the issue for Ghana, because the concerns have been raised by Ghanaians. Ghanaians thought that the way that provision is, it meant that the laws of Ghana were subordinate to the laws of the United States. No. In fact, the compact is not based on U.S. law. The compact is based on international law. And what that provision said was that in the case of conflict between the compact provisions and domestic law, then the compact provisions will prevail. Now, so these implementation letters will seek to explain that and make everyone comfortable with the arrangement.
All right. Thank you very much, Engineer Rasafo. He's the Chief Executive of the Millennium Development Authority.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Israel Laye bringing us up to speed with some developments at the biggest conference currently taking place at the Alisa Hotel in Accra, and from where we are hearing that new terms and conditions have been agreed upon by government for the new concessionaire to take over ECG, one of which we are hearing that the Ghana government must own or must have majority shares in whichever company is shortlisted for the ECG concessionaire. We'll bring in some more development in our subsequent bulletins. But for now, let's still stay within the energy sector. The National Petroleum Authority, NPA, says it has started enforcing a government directive to close down oil marketing companies that fail to comply with safety standards. The move has been influenced by recent gas and fire outbreaks at some service stations in the country. According to the authority, investigations have shown that most of these accidents were due to human negligence and failure to enforce state safety standards. The regulator is also pushing ahead to stop siting of new service stations in residential areas. Hassan Tampuni is Chief Executive Officer of the National Petroleum Authority.
It's a decision that NPA has taken and then we are implementing. If you feel the tests of safety standards and it is established beyond all reasonable that indeed there has been some amount of negligence or refusal to follow the safety protocols, we'll crack the whip. We can suspend indefinitely or we can revoke completely and impose fines in addition.
And when are you going to start implementing this?
At once.
At once.
That's right.
So one would also talk about the fact that how bent are you going forward to ensure that all these members comply with the safety standards?
We intend in implementing this policy not to take prisoners. We are not going to have any secret cows. You fail the test, we exact the necessary sanctions. So we are not going to have any qualms about who is involved or any mitigation circumstances that you have. Safety standards must be adhered to, and there are terms and conditions of license. And when we come on an annual basis to come and inspect your stations and test the integrity of your system, we expect that 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, or even 11 months under the line, those standards that we saw must still be in place. It's a continuous thing that you must do. It's not an event waiting for NPA to come and then inspect and then they renew your license. We'll still be doing the monitoring. The multi-stakeholder committee that is responsible for review of documentations before permits are given would be converted into additional monitoring mechanism, so that not only will they go to do inspection before the grant of license, they will also go in addition to the monitoring and inspection team of the NPA to undertake some amount of monitoring. In addition to that, we also have some risk assessors that we have engaged who will also be going around to test the integrity of the processes that are in existence at various refill outlets. So their reports would also give us an indication whether or not to allow retail outlets at their existing points to continue to operate, or whether to recommend improvement of their safety mechanisms, or whether to recommend even complete relocation of those retail outlets, and we will implement them.
The Chamber of Commerce and Industries has met with some key industry players on the best ways to reposition ahead of the implementation of government's flagship One District, One Factory policy. This is the first in a series of such engagements on the policy. There's more in this report.
The forum gave an opportunity for the Chamber of Commerce to interact with several businessmen and women on how to reposition themselves for the upcoming One District, One Factory policy. President of the Chamber, Nana Dankawoso I, is hopeful the program will not only create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, but also help them to become more competitive on the world market.
And the Chamber is seeking collaboration with governments, local and international partners in undertaking the necessary research. Our work, without doubt, clarify the value-added part, initiate and sustain value chain governance, make businesses and products more competitive, and encourage more actors onto the chain to create more sustainable
In an address, Minister for Trade and Industry Alan Tremantin said the One District, One Factory policy will create in excess of 1 million jobs. According to him, government has received over 100 business proposals so far, an indication that the private sector is eager to partner government in the policy.
There are 6 strategic objectives for this policy initiative. First, it is intended to create massive employment, particularly for the youth, in our rural and peri-urban communities, and thereby improve income levels and the standard of living.
On his part, Managing Director of the Ghana Commercial Bank, Ansel Ray Soa, revealed the bank is committing 1 billion cedis for the facilitation of the One District, One Factory policy.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what our leaders had in mind when GCB Bank was formed some 64 years ago. The bank has always provided financial intermediation for national development. I am proud to say that GCB Bank has allocated up to 1 billion Ghana cedis to support the viable proposals under this initiative.
Meanwhile, the chamber is expected to forward or communicate to government on the best ways of making the policy a successful one come its official launch in July.
And that will be a wrap for this afternoon's edition of The Marketplace. Many thanks for your company. Do join me again, same time tomorrow. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji. Have a good afternoon.